Congresswoman Omar, if the United States and Somalia went to war tomorrow, hypothetically, which side would you want to win? The question hung in the air like the acrid smoke from a freshly fired gun. Senator John Kennedy's thick Louisiana drawl made it sound almost casual, as if he were just asking about the weather. But every single person in that Senate Foreign Relations Committee room knew this was the fatal blow. It was the climax of 90 minutes of methodical, devastating questioning. Complete silence. It was the kind of heavy silence that carries a physical weight, pressing down on your chest until you can hear your own breathing. Ilhan Omar sat at the witness table, flanked by 3 high-priced lawyers in sharp suits. She had been radiating confidence when she walked in 2 hours ago. Defiant, even. She'd survived plenty of Republican attacks before. She'd been called a terrorist, accused of anti-Semitism, and investigated for campaign finance violations. She always emerged stronger, more celebrated by her base, and better at turning controversy into a fundraising win. But this time felt different. This wasn't just another partisan jab. This was a straightforward question, a binary choice, America or Somalia, and she couldn't bring herself to answer it. 10 seconds of silence stretched into 15. 15 became 20. The C-SPAN cameras were locked tight on her face. Every major news network had broken away to cover the moment live. Millions of people were watching and waiting. That is a ridiculous hypothetical. Her voice had that sharp defensive edge she only used when she felt cornered. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. It's a simple question, ma'am. Every American should be able to answer that in a heartbeat. Which side would you want to win? Another long pause. You could see her mentally calculating. The wheels were turning behind her eyes because there was simply no right answer. Say America. Then she betrays everything she's told Somali American audiences for years about our homeland and our people back home. Say Somalia, and her political career ends right there on national television. Say neither, and everyone understands exactly what that silence signifies. I refuse to engage with Islamophobic hypotheticals designed to question my loyalty. Kennedy simply held up a hand. His tone remained gentle, almost kind, which somehow made the whole thing worse. I haven't mentioned your religion once in 2 hours, ma'am. Not a single time. I've asked about your allegiance to nations, not your personal faith. I've asked which country you would choose if you were forced to make a choice, America or Somalia. This isn't about Islam, it's about loyalty. He picked up a document from the stack in front of him, noting that they had recordings of her telling Somali American audiences that our homeland was being attacked by America. She had claimed our people back home needed our help. She'd referred to Somalia as home in the present tense 43 times in the last 5 years. So I'm asking, when you say home, which country do you mean? I am allowed to have a complex identity. You can have any identity you like, ma'am. You can take pride in your heritage. You can love your Somali culture. But you can only have one loyalty in the United States Congress. You swore a sacred oath to the Constitution of the United States. Not the Somali Constitution. Not both. One. So, for the final time, if America and Somalia went to war, which side would you want to win? 25 seconds of silence now. 30. It was the longest silence in the history of modern congressional hearings. And then something happened that absolutely nobody expected. Someone in the audience stood up. 8th row, left side. It was a Somali American woman wearing a black hijab and a professional suit. Just say America, Ilhan. Her voice was crystal clear, cutting through the silence like a knife. Why can't you just say America? Omar turned to look at her, sheer shock written all over her face. This was supposed to be a safe, friendly space. The audience was filled with Somali Americans and progressive activists who had always supported her. But the woman's voice only grew stronger. My family chose this country. We fled Somalia because it failed us. We came here. We took the oath of citizenship, and we meant every word of it. We declared that America is our home now. Not Somalia. America. Why can't you say the same thing? Omar opened her mouth, closed it, and looked toward her lawyers. They were staring down at their notes, completely unable to help her. She looked back at Kennedy. He was waiting patiently, with that slight, sad smile as if he already knew how the story would end. And then Ilhan Omar stood up, grabbed her papers with trembling hands, and looked at the committee chairman. I'm not going to sit here and be part of this racist circus. Kennedy's voice stopped her in her tracks, still calm, still carrying that southern drawl. Congresswoman, you are still under oath. You cannot just leave. Watch me. She was already on the move. Her lawyers scrambled to gather their things and follow her out. Ma'am, if you walk out without answering, everyone watching will know exactly what your silence means. She stopped at the door and turned back. Her voice was shaking with a mix of anger and fear. My response is that I don't owe you or anyone else any proof of where my loyalty lies. I took the oath of citizenship. I took the oath of office. That should be plenty. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. The oath of citizenship requires you to renounce your allegiance to all foreign nations, specifically to give it up entirely. But you haven't actually let go of your ties to Somalia, have you? You're still calling it home. You still refer to Somalis as our people. You continue to vote for the Somali government's interests over American ones. An oath means nothing if you don't actually honor it. Omar offered no reply. She pushed through the exit and vanished. The hearing room descended into chaos, with flash bulbs popping, reporters yelling, and senators bickering, while Kennedy sat there calmly stacking his papers as if he'd just finished a standard meeting rather than ending a congresswoman's career on national television. To truly understand how we got here, how a classic refugee success story turned into a debate over divided loyalties, you have to rewind 90 minutes to when Ilhan Omar first walked in, convinced she could weather this storm just like she had every other one. Tuesday morning, February the 3rd, 2026, room 419 of the Senate Hart Office Building. The Foreign Relations Committee room was packed with journalists, cameras, and aides. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone present knew this was going to be a bombshell. The hearing followed a ProPublica investigation from 3 weeks prior. The headline was blunt: a Congresswoman's secret collaboration. How Ilhan Omar's team worked alongside the Somali government to sway U.S. policy. The findings were absolutely brutal. Phone records revealed constant contact between Omar's staff and Somali officials. There were emails coordinating their talking points. Meeting logs had been kept off the books. Financial trails showed hundreds of thousands of dollars moving from Somali-linked sources into Omar's campaign funds and her husband's private business. The evidence formed an undeniable pattern. Omar would get a classified briefing regarding Somalia. Within 48 hours, she'd be in touch with Somali government representatives. Then, she'd cast votes or release statements that matched Somali interests perfectly, even when they clashed with official U.S. policy. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee moved to hold these oversight hearings, subpoenaing Ilhan Omar to testify under oath. She arrived at 9:45 a.m. Ilhan Omar was 43 years old. She had arrived in America as a 12-year-old refugee from Somalia, survived 4 years in a Kenyan camp, mastered English, gained citizenship, worked as an organizer, and eventually stunned the political establishment by winning a seat in Congress in 2016. She had since been re-elected 3 times. She was a key figure in the Squad, that group of progressive congresswomen who were icons to the left and villains to the right. Her entire career was built on facing attacks and coming out on top. Every new scandal only seemed to boost her profile. Every Republican jab was turned into a fresh fundraising pitch. She had mastered the art of turning heat into political momentum. She walked into the hearing room wearing a vibrant purple hijab and a matching suit. She looked professional and completely unfazed. 3 attorneys flanked her, including 2 from a top-tier D.C. firm. One was a Somali-American civil rights lawyer brought along for the imagery. Her PR team sat in the gallery, ready to tweet and spin the narrative in real time. Omar took her place at the witness table. She straightened her documents, leaned in to whisper to her legal team, and gave the cameras that trademark look of quiet defiance. To her, this was just another partisan hit job. She'd survived much worse. What Ilhan Omar didn't realize was that John Kennedy had spent the last 6 weeks preparing for this exact encounter. It wasn't just about the policy breaches or the questionable finances, damning as they were, but something more profound, something that couldn't be spun or explained away. 6 weeks ago, in Kennedy's office within the Russell Building, his chief of staff arrived with 3 boxes full of files. "Sir, here is everything you requested on Omar's public statements regarding Somalia versus America." John Kennedy looked up from a foreign aid bill he was studying. He was 73, but he appeared youthful, energetic, and sharp. That thick Louisiana drawl and folksy charm often led people to underestimate him. It was a mistake they always lived to regret. His background painted a very different picture. Vanderbilt for undergrad, UVA for law school, and then a year at Oxford. He'd been a trial lawyer for 2 decades, and the Louisiana State Treasurer before making it to the Senate. He was far more than he let on. He always had been. "So what's the verdict?" Kennedy asked. His chief of staff began pulling out transcripts, video clips, and audio recordings. It's a consistent pattern. She almost always identifies as Somali first and American second, if at all. She still speaks about Somalia as home in the present tense. She refers to Somalis as our people. When discussing Somali Americans, she uses terms like we and us. Yet, when she speaks about Americans in general, she typically says they and them. Kennedy began poring over the transcripts. It only took 10 minutes before he started scribbling down notes. A 2019 speech at a Minneapolis community center. "Our homeland is being targeted by American drones. Our people are being killed." A 2021 fundraiser for Somali famine relief. "We have to support our brothers and sisters back home. Our people are suffering." A speech at the University of Minnesota in 2023. "Somalia is in our blood and in our hearts. We can't ever forget our roots." A 2024 interview with Somali language media. "I will always stand up for our people in Somalia. That is my responsibility." Kennedy glanced up. How often does she call Somalia home or her homeland? His chief of staff leafed through the records. There are 43 documented cases over the last 5 years. All in the present tense. Not just where she was born or where she's from, but home, as if it's where she lives now. And then there's America. She refers to it as this country or the United States. She never calls it home. It's never my country, it's always this country. Almost like she's just a visitor. Kennedy stayed silent for a long while. Get me her voting record. Every single vote on Somalia, foreign aid, sanctions, military ops, everything. They spent the next 2 weeks digging into her voting history. The pattern was absolute, a full 100%. On every single vote, Omar sided with Somali government interests over U.S. policy. A bill to sanction Somali officials linked to al-Shabaab. She voted no. An amendment to increase oversight on foreign aid to Somalia. She voted no. A resolution condemning human rights abuses by the Somali government. She just voted present. That's 12 votes across 5 years. 12 times she chose Somalia's interests over America's. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Kennedy's team matched those votes against her personal calendar. Every single one of those votes took place within 2 weeks of her meeting with Somali officials. It's a clear pattern, Kennedy told his team. A classified briefing on Somalia, a meeting with Somali officials, then a vote favoring the Somali government. 17 times in 5 years. That is no coincidence. His chief of staff looked concerned. If you're suggesting she's leaking classified info, I'm not suggesting a thing. I'm just going to ask questions and let her own answers tell the story. They spent another 2 weeks tracking the money trail. There were campaign donations from groups funded by the Somali government. Her husband's consulting firm was taking payments from Somali business interests. She was receiving speaking fees from organizations tied to the Somali government. It was all technically legal and eventually disclosed, but the pattern was undeniable. By the time they finished, Kennedy had a 50-page binder. Every instance she called Somalia home. Every vote favoring Somalia over the U.S., every meeting with Somali officials, and every dollar from Somali sources, all cross-referenced, documented, and on public record. He had no intention of calling her a spy or a traitor. He was simply going to ask which country she serves and let her answer, or her silence, speak for itself. Now, at 10 a.m. on February 3rd, the hearing was officially called to order. The chairman brought the room to a hush. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on Foreign Agents Registration Act compliance and congressional ethics will now come to order. The opening statements went exactly as expected. Democrats defended Omar, labeling the hearing a partisan witch hunt while highlighting her immigrant journey and her past struggles. Republicans demanded accountability, focusing on national security and questioning where her loyalties truly lay. It was typical political theater that wouldn't change any minds or fix anything. Then it was Kennedy's turn. He stood up slowly, straightened his papers, and took a quick sip of water. That deliberate pace was intentional, building tension and leaving everyone waiting in anticipation. Congresswoman Omar, thank you for joining us today. His tone was soft and conversational. I know you didn't want to be here. No one enjoys being subpoenaed, but I do appreciate your cooperation with this committee's oversight duties. Omar gave a sharp nod, bracing for the inevitable attack. I want to begin by acknowledging your truly incredible personal journey. Arriving in America as a young refugee, spending years in a camp, mastering a new language and culture, becoming a citizen, and eventually being elected to Congress. That is truly remarkable. That's the embodiment of the American dream. Omar's expression softened just a bit. Where exactly was he leading with this? And I mean that with all sincerity, Kennedy went on. I'm a believer in immigration. When people arrive here legally, work hard, embrace our values, and become Americans. That's exactly what makes this country so special. That's what has always set us apart. He took a brief pause, which is precisely why I want to understand something that has been weighing on my mind. When you earned your U.S. citizenship, you swore an oath. Do you recall those words? I do, Senator. Would you mind reciting a portion for us today? Omar hesitated for a moment. She clearly didn't see that one coming. I pledged my loyalty to this country and promised to defend the Constitution. You went a step further than that, ma'am. The words of that citizenship oath are incredibly precise. You vowed to completely and utterly walk away from any loyalty to any foreign leader, power, or nation. In short, you explicitly gave up your allegiance to Somalia. Do you recollect that specific section? Yes, I do. And yet, when you joined Congress, you took a second oath to protect the Constitution against all threats, whether they're from abroad or right here at home. You haven't forgotten that one either, have you? That's correct. Certainly. Kennedy took his seat and peered at her over the rim of his glasses. That's good, because those very promises are what I want to discuss. I'm trying to see if you've actually kept your word. Frankly, the American public deserves to know the answer as well. Suddenly, the mood in the room shifted. This conversation wasn't about debating laws or differing political views. This was strictly about where her loyalty lies. Omar's top attorney leaned in to whisper a quick word. She gave a tiny, subtle shake of her head. She was no stranger to tough interrogation. She knew she could get through this. Kennedy reached for a folder on his desk. Let's begin with a few simple facts. Have you ever had meetings with members of the government in Somalia? My role on the Foreign Affairs Committee requires me to meet with many international leaders. That wasn't my question, ma'am. Did you, specifically, meet with representatives of the Somali state? Yes, and how often has that happened over the last 5 years? She stole a quick look at her legal team. One lawyer began to chime in, but Kennedy immediately cut him off. I'd prefer to hear the answer from the Congresswoman herself. Omar turned her gaze back to the senator. I can't give you a precise number right now. Well, I can. It was 47 times. There are records of 47 meetings with Somali officials, ranging from several sit-downs with their ambassador to 3 with the foreign minister and 2 with the prime minister himself. Does that tally seem right to you? If the documentation says so, then that's what happened. Now, did you ever report these interactions under the Foreign Agents Registration Act? There was a heavy silence. Her counsel started whispering to her with a sense of urgency. Congresswoman, Kennedy prodded. Her attorney finally cut in. These meetings were strictly for official business and didn't require any special registration. Counselor, with all due respect, I'm addressing the Congresswoman. Ma'am, did you personally file those papers? No, because I wasn't working on behalf of a foreign power. I was just handling routine diplomatic matters. We can debate how routine they were later. Right now, I'm just getting the facts on the table. 47 meetings with the Somali government in 5 years. 0 registration. Is that the gist of it? Yes. I appreciate you being direct. Kennedy scribbled something down. We'll get into the details of those talks in just a bit. But first, let's look at how you portray your bond with Somalia. Kennedy grabbed a tablet and settled his glasses on his nose. Congresswoman, you spoke at a Somali-American gathering in Minneapolis back in 2019. You were talking about American drone strikes taking place in Somalia. The transcript says you said, and I quote, "Our homeland is being attacked, and our people are being killed by American drones." As she recalled saying that, Omar chose her next words very carefully. I was voicing my deep concern for the civilians caught in the crossfire. I get that you're concerned. Losing innocent lives is a tragedy, but I'm focused on the words you chose. You called it our homeland. You didn't refer to it as the Somali homeland or even their homeland. You said our homeland, implying it's your own. Do you still consider Somalia your home? It is where I was born. But you're a citizen of the United States now, ma'am. You've called this country home for more than 2 decades. You hold a seat in the U.S. Congress. Your job is to represent the American people. So when you call Somalia our homeland, who is the "our" you're talking about? And are you including yourself in that group? Omar shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Senator, I can be proud of where I came from without. Of course you can. No one is saying you shouldn't take pride in your roots. However, there is a massive gap between heritage and true loyalty. Let me try this again. When you used the phrase, our homeland, were you talking about Somalia as your home? I view myself as a Somali American. That's avoiding the question, ma'am. You can have Somali roots and American culture, but you only get one homeland when it comes to political allegiance, the nation you actually serve. So, which one is it? Is your true home Somalia, or is it the United States? There was no direct response. Kennedy didn't push her on it. He simply moved to the next point. Let me give you another instance. In 2021, you gave a speech at a Minneapolis fundraiser for famine victims in Somalia. That's a noble cause, but listen to your own words. He tapped his tablet, and the audio filled the room. Omar's voice was unmistakable. Our people back home are in pain. This drought has destroyed our communities. We have to do everything possible for our Somali brothers and sisters. They are our family. We can't just leave them behind. Kennedy cut the audio. You said our people back home, not the people of Somalia, and not just Somalis who are suffering. You specifically said our people back home. Using back home implies Somalia is still your home and you're only away for a bit. Is that really how you see it? You're twisting what I said. I'm playing back your exact phrasing, ma'am. It's a clear recording. There's no twisting going on here. You spoke about Somalia in the present tense, calling it back home as if it were still yours. Is it? Omar's lawyer quickly interrupted. Senator, she was just speaking to Somali Americans in a specific cultural setting. Kennedy looked at the attorney. Counselor, if I stood before an Irish-American group and called Ireland back home, people would rightfully ask if my loyalty was to America or Ireland. A cultural setting doesn't change what those words actually mean. She claimed Somalia is back home. I'm asking if she truly believes that. He turned back toward Omar. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. My staff has found 43 separate instances over the last 5 years where you called Somalia home, homeland, or back home in the present tense. 43 separate times. Do you want to hear more of the recordings? That won't be necessary. Good. So let me ask you this. In those same 5 years, how many times have you called America home or my homeland? Silence filled the room. The total is 0, ma'am, not even once. You call it this country or the United States, always keeping it at arm's length. It's like you're describing a place you live in but don't actually belong to. Why is that? Omar remained silent. She knew anything she said would only make things worse. Kennedy held up a chart. Let's look at your voting record in Congress, specifically concerning Somalia. He displayed the chart for the cameras. Over the last 5 years, there were 12 bills, amendments, or resolutions in the House directly related to Somalia, covering sanctions on officials, aid conditions, oversight, and human rights abuses, resulting in 12 separate votes. Do you remember how you voted on those 12 occasions? Omar didn't say a word. You voted in favor of the Somali government's interests and against official U.S. policy every single time. A 100% record. Let me give you a few specific examples. Kennedy turned a page in his binder. In 2021, a bill was introduced to place targeted sanctions on 15 Somali officials and officers with proven links to Al-Shabaab, the terrorists who have murdered American soldiers, aid workers, and journalists. The bill was extremely specific, naming 15 individuals. It passed the House by a vote of 391 to 4. You were one of those 4 no votes. Why would you vote to protect Somali officials who collaborate with terrorists? The bill was too broad and would have impacted innocent people. Ma'am, I just stated it named 15 specific people. How is that considered overly broad? Sanction programs often lead to unintended results. These were very specific sanctions. We're talking about asset freezes and travel bans for 15 men proven to be working with a known terrorist group. Yet you voted no. The only logical conclusion is that you chose the Somali government's interests over America's security. Is there any other way to explain it? Omar's jaw tightened. I voted according to my conscience and my knowledge of the region. Let me give you another one. In 2022, an amendment was proposed to add oversight to $400 million in U.S. aid going to Somalia. It required the Somali government to submit quarterly reports proving the money wasn't being stolen or handed to militants. It was basic accountability. The amendment passed 357 to 18. You voted no. Why would you vote against transparency? The requirements were punitive and counterproductive. These were simply measures to ensure American tax dollars weren't being stolen, but you still opposed them. Why? She had no good answer. Kennedy leaned in closer. And here's the most interesting part, Congresswoman. Every single one of those 12 votes took place within 2 weeks of you meeting with Somali government officials. Every single one. The pattern is undeniable. He pulled out another file. Let me show you. August 2021. You meet the Somali ambassador. 2 weeks later, you vote against sanctions. March 2022. You meet the foreign minister. 1 week later, you vote against the Oversight Amendment. September 2023. You meet with the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. 10 ngày sau, Ban đã bỏ phiếu chống lại một nghị quyết lên án các vụ vi phạm nhân quyền của chính phủ Somali. Kennedy rời mắt khỏi sắp tài liệu trên tay. 17 lần trong vòng 5 năm, bạn đã gặp gỡ các quan chức chính phủ Somali và sau đó bỏ phiếu có lợi cho họ chỉ trong vòng chưa đầy 2 tuần. Đó không phải là một sự trùng hợp ngẫu nhiên đâu, thưa bà. Đó rõ ràng là sự dàn xếp. Đó chỉ là sự tương quan, chứ không phải là quan hệ nhân quả. Nó là một quy luật. Và điều đó đặt ra một câu hỏi hiển nhiên. Bạn đang bỏ phiếu dựa trên đánh giá của cá nhân mình về những gì tốt nhất cho nước Mỹ, hay bạn đang bỏ phiếu theo đúng những gì các quan chức Somali yêu cầu? Hãy bàn về vấn đề tài chính của bà, Kennedy nói và rút ra các báo cáo của FEC, bao gồm quy tranh cử và các lợi ích kinh doanh của gia đình bà. Ông lật mở một trong những bản báo cáo đó. Trong chu kỳ bầu cử năm 2022, chiến dịch của bạn đã nhận được $847.000 từ một tổ chức có tên là Hội đồng lãnh đạo người Mỹ gốc Somali. Đó là một số tiền khổng lồ chỉ đến từ một nguồn duy nhất. Hội đồng lãnh đạo người Mỹ gốc Somali thực chất là gì? Đó là một tổ chức cộng đồng chuyên hỗ trợ các ứng cử viên và những vấn đề của người Mỹ gốc Somali. Đó là một tổ chức vận động hành lang, thưa bà. Và theo hồ sơ thuế của họ, nguồn vốn chủ yếu đến từ các doanh nghiệp Somali, mà nhiều trong số đó có mối liên hệ trực tiếp với chính phủ Somali. Bà đã nhận gần $850.000 từ một tổ chức có liên đới với chính phủ nước ngoài. Bà có công khai điều đó với các cử tri của mình không? Luật sư của bà ta ngắt lời. Những khoản đóng góp đó là hợp pháp và đã được báo cáo đầy đủ cho FEC. Tôi không hỏi liệu chúng có hợp pháp hay không. Tôi đang hỏi liệu bà ấy có công khai với cử tri rằng mình đang nhận tiền từ các nguồn có liên kết với chính phủ nước ngoài hay không, bởi vì cử tri có quyền được biết khi nào dân biểu của họ được tài trợ bởi một quốc gia khác. Kennedy rút ra một tài liệu khác. Công ty tư vấn của chồng bà, E Street Group. Theo hồ sơ công khai,
Công ty này đã nhận được 230.000 đô la tiền thanh toán từ các doanh nghiệp Somali vào năm 2023. Con số đó cao gấp 3 lần so với những gì công ty kiếm được vào năm trước đó. Những dịch vụ nào mà công ty của ông ấy đã cung cấp để xứng đáng với khoản thanh toán như vậy? Công việc kinh doanh của chồng tôi hoàn toàn tách biệt với nhiệm vụ của tôi tại Quốc hội. Nhưng hai người sống chung một nhà. Hai người dùng chung tài chính, khai thuế chung và thu nhập của ông ấy đã tăng gấp 3 lần ngay sau khi bà bắt đầu có các cuộc gặp gỡ thường xuyên với giới chức Somali. Bà định nói rằng mình không thấy có sự liên kết nào ở đây sao? Mắt Omar đỏ bừng. Đó chỉ là lời bóng gió. Đó là sự thật đã được ghi chép lại. Và đây là một sự thật khác. Bà đã thực hiện 6 buổi diễn thuyết có trả phí trong vòng 2 năm qua. Tổng mức thù lao là 340.000 đô la. 5 trong số 6 sự kiện đó được tài trợ bởi các tổ chức có quan hệ tài chính trực tiếp với chính phủ Somali. Bà đang được trả hàng trăm ngàn đô la bởi các nguồn tin thân cận với Somalia, trong khi lại bỏ phiếu có lợi cho lợi ích của họ. Đó không phải là phục vụ công chúng, thưa bà. Đó là xung đột lợi ích. Giống Kennedy trầm xuống, trở nên nghiêm trọng hơn. Thưa bà dân biểu, bà đang phục vụ trong Ủy ban Đối ngoại Hạ viện. Điều đó cho phép bà tiếp cận với các buổi báo cáo tình báo tôi mắc. Có đúng vậy không? Đúng, bao gồm cả các báo cáo mắc đặc biệt về Somalia, về các mối đe dọa khủng bố, các hoạt động quân sự và các đánh giá tình báo. Đúng chứ? Tôi không thể thảo luận về thông tin mắc trong bối cảnh như thế này. Tôi không yêu cầu bà tiết lộ bí mật quốc gia. Tôi đang hỏi liệu bà có nhận được các buổi báo cáo mắc về Somalia hay không? Có hay không? Có. Và sau khi nhận được những thông tin mật đó, bà đã gặp gỡ hoặc liên lạc với các quan chức chính phủ Somali, phải không? Một khoảng lăng dài và đầy căng thẳng. Tôi chỉ thực hiện các cuộc hội đàm ngoại giao thông thường như một phần công việc của ủy ban. Đó không phải là điều tôi đã hỏi. Sau khi tiếp nhận thông tin mạt về Somalia, bà đã gặp gỡ hoặc liên lạc với phía chính phủ Somali chưa? Các luật sư của bà đang thì thầm một cách khẩn trương. Đây là một vấn đề cực kỳ nguy hiểm. Tôi có thể đã có một vài cuộc trò chuyện. Có thể đã có. Kennedy lôi ra các bản ghi chép điện thoại. Đây là lịch sử cuộc gọi thu thập được thông qua các yêu cầu theo luật 4OIR, hồ sơ công khai. Hãy để tôi đọc cho bà nghe trình tự thời gian này. Ngày 12 tháng 8 năm 2023, bà đã tham gia một buổi báo cáo mật kín về hoạt động của Al-Shabaab ở miền nam Somalia. Ngay tối hôm đó vào lúc 7:43 chiều, bà đã thực hiện một cuộc gọi kéo dài 40 phút cho đại sứ Somali. Bà đã thảo luận những gì trong cuộc gọi đó? Tôi không nhớ rõ chi tiết. Ngày 3 tháng 9 năm 2023. Một buổi báo cáo mặt khác, lần này là về kế hoạch hoạt động quân sự của Hoa Kỳ trong khu vực. Ngay đêm đó, bà đã có cuộc gọi dài 35 phút với một quan chức tại Bộ Ngoại giao Somali. Bà đã thảo luận điều gì vậy? Chỉ là các vấn đề ngoại giao chung thôi. Thưa bà, đây là một quy luật. 17 lần trong 3 năm, bà tham dự các buổi báo cáo mặt về Somalia và liên lạc với các quan chức nước này trong vòng 48 giờ sau đó. Ở mức độ nhẹ nhất, điều đó cho thấy một sự phán đoán tồi tệ. Ở mức độ tệ nhất, đó là hành vi gián điệp. Từ ngữ đó treo lơ lửng trong không trung như một quả bom sắp nổ. Tôi chưa bao giờ, tuyệt đối, chưa bao giờ làm rò rỉ thông tin mật. Tôi rất muốn tin vào điều đó. Thực sự là như vậy. Nhưng những bằng chứng này là không thể phủ nhận. Bà nhận được tình báo nhạy cảm về Somalia. Bà ngay lập tức liên hệ với giới chức Somali. Và sau đó bà bỏ phiếu theo cách mang lại lợi ích cho chính phủ Somali. Even if you aren't leaking classified info, you're at least sharing insights and policy shifts that Somalia has no business knowing. Either way, you're looking out for their interests instead of ours. Kennedy turned his gaze toward the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call a witness, if the committee allows it. Taken by surprise,
The chairman gave a quick nod. Go ahead. We have a member of the Somali American community here who asked for a chance to speak on these matters. Her name is Amina Hassan. She's one of Congresswoman Omar's own constituents. A woman in her mid-40s stood up from the crowd. She was dressed in a sharp gray suit and a black hijab. She stepped up to the microphone designated for audience questions. Thank you, Senator Kennedy, and thank you for your time, Congresswoman Omar. Omar's expression turned guarded. Amina Hassan spoke with a voice that was firm and steady. Congresswoman, I cast my vote for you back in 2016 and again in 2018. I was so incredibly proud to see a Somali woman representing us in Congress. I truly believed you would stand up for us. I thought you would represent the Somali Americans who chose this nation and truly love it. She took a brief pause. But I stand here today because you simply do not represent me. You don't speak for our community, and I want that to be perfectly clear. Omar's face grew cold. My family escaped Somalia back in 1993. Amina went on with her story. During the Civil War, my father was murdered by militias fighting for control of Mogadishu. We spent 3 long years living in a Kenyan refugee camp. When we finally arrived in America, my mother broke down in tears. She told me that we were finally safe. Finally, we were home. Her voice grew even more resolute. We earned our citizenship in 2001. I still remember that ceremony so clearly. I was only 16 when we took the oath and renounced our allegiance to Somalia. My mother reached out and squeezed my hand. She whispered, "We are Americans now." And she truly meant every word of it. We all did. Amina locked eyes with Omar. Somalia let us down. The government there is nothing but corruption and violence, run by warlords and terrorists. We came here because we actively chose this country. We love this nation. Whenever people ask where I'm from, I tell them Minnesota. When they ask about my roots, I say I'm a Somali American. But when they ask where home is, I say America without a second thought or a single caveat. This is home. She paused for effect. But you continue to refer to Somalia as home. You continue to accept money from the Somali government. You keep voting to protect their interests, even at the expense of America. You aren't representing Somali Americans. You're representing the Somali government. And we're tired of you pretending to be our voice. The entire room fell silent. Omar had absolutely nothing to say. What could she even say? Amina returned to her seat. Kennedy gave her a respectful nod. Thank you, ma'am. Congresswoman Omar, would you care to respond? Omar looked from Amina back to Kennedy. I respect her point of view, but I don't believe... Do you actually disagree with anything she just said? I believe my record speaks for itself. Oh, it certainly does. And that is exactly the problem. Kennedy began gathering his papers, meticulously stacking them. The slow, deliberate pace was clearly building towards something significant. Congresswoman, we've laid out several facts today. You repeatedly refer to Somalia as home, or your homeland in the present tense. We have 43 documented instances of this. You've voted for Somali government interests over American ones 12 out of 12 times, a perfect 100%. You've accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from sources tied to the Somali government. You've attended classified briefings and then immediately reached out to Somali officials 17 different times. And you just heard from one of your own constituents, a Somali American refugee just like yourself, stating that you don't represent this community. She said you represent a foreign government.
He looked up, meeting her gaze. So, I want to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer,
Because the American people deserve the truth. The room went absolutely dead silent. Everyone knew something massive was about to happen. Kennedy leaned in just a little closer. If the United States and Somalia went to war tomorrow, hypothetically, in an actual armed conflict, which side would you want to see win? 10 seconds of pure silence passed. 15, 20. It was the longest silence anyone could remember in a hearing like this. Omar's mouth opened and then closed again. She shot a glance toward her lawyers. They just stared down at the table, completely unable to bail her out. This was a question only she could answer. That is a completely ridiculous hypothetical. It's not ridiculous at all, ma'am. It is the most fundamental question of loyalty there is. Two nations in a fight. Which one would you want to come out on top? Every single American should be able to answer that in a heartbeat. Which side would you want to win? I refuse to engage with Islamophobic questions meant to attack my loyalty. Kennedy's voice stayed perfectly calm. He remained patient. I haven't brought up your religion a single time today. Not once in 2 full hours of questioning. I've asked about your allegiance to nations, not your personal faith. This has nothing to do with Islam. This is about whether you are serving the interests of America or the interests of Somalia. America or Somalia? Which side would you want to see come out on top? The room fell silent again. Half a minute passed. It was clear to everyone that Omar was cornered. In the crowd, Amina Hassan rose to her feet once more. Just say America, Ilhan. Why is it so hard for you to just say America? Omar turned toward her, her face a mask of shock and fury. Amina's voice grew even louder. Our family picked this nation. We took that oath, and we truly meant it. We said goodbye to Somalia and welcomed America. This isn't some complex issue. It's not a trick question. America is our home. Just say the word. Another Somali-American man stood up in the audience. We can say it. Why can't you? A woman wearing a hijab rose as well. You're giving us all a bad name. You're making people believe we can't be faithful Americans. Omar jumped up, the sound of her chair scraping against the floor. I refuse to take part in this biased spectacle meant to force Muslims to prove their patriotism. Kennedy's voice sliced through the noise. He remained perfectly composed. Ma'am, you are still testifying under oath. You don't have the right to just walk out. Just watch me. She began snatching up her documents with trembling hands. Congresswoman, if you leave this hearing without giving an answer, everyone watching, and there are millions, will know exactly what your silence implies. Choosing not to answer is an answer in itself. She paused and turned back to look at him. Her voice was thick with rage. My response is that I don't owe you or anyone else any proof of my loyalty to this nation. I swore the oath of citizenship. I swore the oath of office. That ought to be plenty. Kennedy just shook his head slowly. The citizenship oath requires you to give up allegiance to all other nations. Yet, you haven't given up your allegiance to Somalia. You still call it home. You vote based on its interests. You accept its funding. You're meeting with its leaders right after classified briefings. The oath doesn't mean a thing if you don't live by it. I'm finished with this hearing. Omar snatched her briefcase. Ma'am, I said, I am done. She headed for the exit as her lawyers scrambled to keep up. The cameras caught every single detail. Her livid face, her twitching hands, and the way she avoided looking at anyone. When she reached the door, she stopped and looked back one last time. You want to know whose side I'm on? I side with peace. I side with diplomacy. I refuse to play into your false choices and warmongering what-ifs. Kennedy's reply was soft, but it hit like a ton of bricks. Ma'am, any American soldier, diplomat, or citizen can say they choose America when the chips are down. The fact that you can't say it tells us everything about where your heart truly lies. Ilhan Omar shoved through the door and disappeared. The hearing room descended into chaos. Senators were shouting, reporters were screaming questions, and cameras were flashing everywhere. But in the middle of it all, Kennedy just sat there calmly, tidying his desk, as if he'd just wrapped up a standard meeting. Within minutes, the footage was all over the internet. Not the whole 2-hour session, but the 30-second clips, the moments that hit home. Our homeland is under attack, followed by Kennedy asking, "Which homeland? Our people back home?" Kennedy asking, "Back home where? Which side would you want to win?" 15 seconds of dead silence. Just say America. A Somali-American constituent pleading with her. Omar storming out without a word. Within 2 hours, the hashtag "Which side?" was trending across the country. Within 4 hours, it had been shared 5 million times. By the 12-hour mark, every major news outlet led with the story. And this time, it wasn't just the conservatives coming after her. Even the liberal media was rattled by her refusal to answer. That night on CNN, a panelist said, "Look, I get not liking hypotheticals, but this is a simple matter of loyalty. Every American ought to be able to say they'd choose America." Then came the MSNBC legal analyst. Her silence on that question is going to haunt her, because silence speaks volumes. The New York Times editorial board weighed in on Representative Omar's disturbing non-answer. But the most crushing blow came from her own community. Friday morning, the Twin Cities Somali Coalition, the biggest Somali-American group in Minnesota, put out a statement. "We moved to America by choice. We ran from Somalia because it failed us, because the government there couldn't keep us safe and we wanted a better life. When we became Americans, we meant every word. We chose America. We expect our leaders to do the exact same thing." Congresswoman Omar's refusal to clearly state her loyalty to America is deeply troubling and doesn't reflect the values of our community. By Friday afternoon, 15 influential Somali-American imams in Minnesota had signed an open letter. "We love this country. We are grateful for the chances America has provided for us and our children. We are proud Americans of Somali descent." We wish Congresswoman Omar would stand up and say the same thing with pride. The political fallout was swift. This past Saturday, the Department of Justice announced it was launching an official probe into potential FARA violations based on the evidence and testimony from the hearing. On Sunday, the House Ethics Committee announced its own investigation into Omar's financial ties with entities linked to the Somali government. By Monday, the polling data revealed the full extent of the damage. 68% of Americans, including 43% of Democrats, felt that Omar should have just answered Kennedy's question. 71% believed her refusal to speak was a clear sign of divided loyalty. 54% thought she should resign from Congress altogether. In her own district, her approval ratings cratered by 19 points in just 72 hours. On Tuesday, Don Samuels, the moderate Democrat who nearly toppled Omar in 2022, announced he would be challenging her again in 2026. His announcement speech was short and to the point. "I love this country without any reservations. I love it with my entire heart. I can say with zero hesitation that if I'm forced to choose between America and any other nation on Earth, I'm picking America every single time. Apparently, our current representative isn't able to say the same thing. That is disqualifying. The first poll released after he jumped in showed him leading Omar by 12 points. Wednesday, 3 members of the squad, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley, released a joint statement. It was carefully worded. We support Representative Omar's right to push back against Islamophobic lines of questioning. We also believe that all Americans, regardless of their background, should be able to state their loyalty to this country clearly. Translation: we aren't sticking our necks out for her silence. Ilhan Omar's office put out multiple statements over the following week. Each one tried to explain, add context, or justify her position. None of them actually included the words, "I would want America to win." That was the core of the problem. In all the statements, the interviews, and the tweets, she never once answered the question, and everybody noticed. John Kennedy eventually sat down for one interview about the hearing with a reporter from the Baton Rouge Advocate, his local paper, rather than a national outlet. "Do you think you were being fair to her?" the reporter asked. Kennedy went quiet for a moment. "I simply asked her which country she would choose. Every American should be able to answer that in a heartbeat. Every naturalized citizen takes an oath specifically renouncing allegiance to other nations just so they can answer that question with total clarity. Her silence wasn't my doing. I just asked a question she should have been able to answer easily if her loyalty was clear. Some people call it a gotcha question. It's only a gotcha if you can't give an honest answer. If you're truly loyal to America, you say, 'America,' without a second thought." The fact that she had to pause, that she couldn't bring herself to say it, well, that tells you everything you need to know. 6 months later, Ilhan Omar lost her primary. It wasn't even close. She lost by 18 points, the biggest defeat for a sitting Minnesota congressman in history. Her concession speech was brief. She spoke about fighting Islamophobia, about standing up for her community, and about never backing down from an attack. She never brought up the question and never explained why she wouldn't answer it. Maybe that's because there just wasn't a good answer. Either she would have chosen Somalia, which would have ended her career instantly, or she would have chosen America, which would have contradicted everything she'd said and done for years. Or she could refuse to answer, which is exactly what she did. And that ended her career anyway. In the end, it wasn't John Kennedy who tanked Ilhan Omar's political future. It was a simple question, just 6 words. Which side would you choose? And her own inability to just say America. Because if you can't say you'd choose America, especially while representing it in Congress, over the country you fled as a refugee, then what are you even doing there? The lesson, if there was one, was this. You can be proud of where you came from. You can love your heritage and your culture. You can keep your connections to the place you were born. But if you want to serve in the United States Congress, you need to be able to say, clearly and without hesitation, that your allegiance belongs to the United States, not to another nation, not to 2 nations, just one. It is the most fundamental requirement of public service in America. And Ilhan Omar just couldn't meet it. Her silence said it all.